Stay with him. He is the only one who can save you now.
The great hall of Ironvale Pack hummed with voices, scent, and the low charge of power that fills any room when everyone inside it has something to prove. Tall iron candelabras lined the walls, throwing unsteady amber light across the faces of wolves who had rank, standing, and names that meant something in this territory. The long tables were set for a formal gathering, the Alpha King's seasonal assembly, the kind no pack member was permitted to skip, not even the ones the pack had quietly decided did not matter anymore. Sabrina Robinson sat at the very back of the hall, near the corner where the light was thinnest and the foot traffic was least. She had arrived early to claim this exact spot. It was the most defensible seat in a room she had no business being in, far enough from the center that no one would single her out, to close enough to the side door that she could leave the moment the gathering released without drawing a second glance. She had her hands folded in her lap. Her shoulders were pulled slightly inward, the way they always were in spaces like this. She wore a plain dress in washed-out grey, the kind of fabric that had been washed too many times and had stopped having opinions about colour. Her light brown hair was loosely pulled back, with a few strands falling forward that she had given up on tucking away. She was 23 years old. She had been a rejected Omega for 3 of those years, and she had spent every one of those 3 years perfecting the particular skill of being in a room without truly being in it, present enough to satisfy obligation, quiet enough that no one remembered she was there. She was watching the far wall when it happened. Not a sound. Not a scene. Just a shift. The way pressure shifts before a storm. Something the air does that the body catches before the mind does. She felt it more than heard it. A slight change in the current of the room, like a frequency dropping a note. On the far side of the hall, Alpha King Alfredo Crook had gone still. He was talking to 2 council members when it happened. From Sabrina's distance, he was an impression more than a full image. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, the particular way a man holds himself when he is accustomed to every person in the room being aware of him. He was dressed in deep charcoal and black, functional and authoritative, nothing decorative about him. He was the kind of presence that changed a room's gravity simply by existing in it. And he had gone completely, utterly still for exactly 2 seconds. His jaw tightened. He corrected it. He resumed the conversation as though nothing had occurred. Nobody noticed. Almost nobody. Near the hall's entrance, standing apart from the gathered wolves with the composed separateness of a woman who had never needed to join a crowd to feel important, Estella Anderson watched her son. Then she turned her silver eyes slowly across the room until they found Sabrina Robinson sitting alone in the corner. And something shifted in Estella's expression. Not surprise, recognition. Sabrina did not see any of this. She was watching the far wall. What she did notice, about 4 minutes later, was Kristen Turner. But Kristen had been working the room in the way she always did, moving between clusters of wolves with the ease of someone who had mapped every social connection in Ironvale and knew exactly which ones were worth cultivating. She was dressed in fitted dark green, her dark hair pinned in precise coils, her posture the kind that suggested she had never once questioned her right to take up space. She was beautiful in the way that sharp things sometimes are, striking on the surface, designed to cut underneath. She had not looked at Sabrina for the first 20 minutes of the gathering. Now she was looking directly at her, and the look was not casual. It was the look of someone who had made a decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. Sabrina looked away. The back of her neck prickled. "Leave. You should leave right now." But she could not leave early from the Alpha King's assembly. That was its own violation. She sat still. She kept her breathing even. She watched the side door and counted the time remaining. And then, without any sound at all, a firm hand closed over her shoulder from behind. The grip was deliberate, controlled. Not aggressive, but not gentle either. The grip of someone who needed to be sure of her attention before saying what came next. Sabrina turned. Estella Anderson stood over her. Silver-haired, silver-eyed, dressed in dark fabric with a heavy fur-edged mantle that settled around her like a statement. Her face was lined with age and made more powerful by it, every line a record of decisions made and survived. She wore small pieces of dark metal jewelry at her collar, old things, pack heirlooms, of the kind that carry meaning rather than decoration. She leaned down close enough that only Sabrina could hear what came next. Her voice was low and unhurried and left no room for argument. Stay with him. He is the only one who can save you now. Then she straightened, placed a second hand briefly over Sabrina's folded fingers, a gesture that was almost, but not quite, reassurance, and walked away across the hall with the measured calm of a woman who had already decided how the night would end. Sabrina sat alone in her corner with her heart moving too fast and 7 words rearranging everything she had thought she understood about tonight. Who is after her? Why can only the Alpha King save her? And why does his mother sound like she already knows something Sabrina does not? Hey, before we go any further, how are you feeling right now? Because I genuinely need to check on you before this story goes where it is going. Thank you so much for being here. It truly means everything. Please hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment below telling us where you are watching from. That support keeps this channel alive, and it helps us keep making stories worth watching. Thank you. Now let us get back to Sabrina. 3 years. That was the number Sabrina measured everything by now. 3 years since Richard Webb had stood in front of the Pax Gathering Hall, looked her in the eyes, and said the words that were never supposed to be survivable. I reject you. You are nothing to me. You will always be nothing to me. He had said it loudly. He had wanted witnesses. He had wanted the humiliation to be a public record, something the Pack would remember, so that no wolf would feel obligated to treat her with any consideration afterward. It had worked exactly as he intended. She was 23 now. She had been 20 when it happened, which meant she had spent the years when most young wolves were building their standing, finding their people, and settling into the life the Pack was supposed to offer. Doing none of those things. She had spent them surviving instead. Survival, she had learned, was its own full-time occupation. She lived with her mother, Cora, in a house at the edge of the Pack's East Territory. It was a small house, older than most in the settlement, with a roof that had developed a slow leak in the north corner 2 winters ago, and had not been fully repaired since, because repairs cost resources, and resources required standing, and standing was something the Robinson family no longer had in any meaningful amount. Cora had not been well since Sabrina's father died. Thomas Robinson had passed 4 years ago, quietly and without warning, the way some deaths arrive, not dramatically enough to make sense of. After him, the family's fragile stability had simply stopped being stable. The small income he had brought in as a Pack record keeper disappeared. The informal respect that came from having a working adult male in a traditional Pack structure evaporated. And Cora, who had never been designed for hardship the way Sabrina had turned out to be, had folded inward in a way she had not fully come back from. Then Richard had rejected Sabrina, and whatever social thread had remained connecting the Robinson family to the Pack's protection dissolved entirely. Not what was left was Eli. Her brother was 12 now, quick-minded and stubborn, and better at pretending not to notice hard things than any 12-year-old should have to be. He went to school. He asked questions about everything. He had recently decided that he was going to be a territorial cartographer when he grew up, which was an impractical plan that Sabrina fully intended to help him chase. She worked 3 rotation shifts for the Pack's East Territory maintenance crew. She cleaned, repaired, cleared, and hauled. She was never thanked. She was barely acknowledged. On the days when she crossed paths with other Pack members while working, most of them looked past her with the practiced ease of people who had decided not to see someone and had gotten good at it. It was an ordinary Tuesday kind of life. Difficult in the specific, though manageable ways of people who have learned which problems they can solve and which ones they simply carry. She managed. She always managed. The Alpha King's seasonal gathering arrived, as it always did, on a Thursday, with the quiet authority of an obligation that did not ask permission. Pack-wide attendance was not optional. Sabrina had attended everyone for 3 years and escaped everyone without being noticed. She had dressed that morning in her grey dress, eaten a small breakfast, kissed Eli's forehead while he complained about it, and left the house before the sun had fully come up. Go. Sit at the back. Leave when it releases. Come home. That is the whole task. She had done it before. She could do it again. What she had not planned for was Kristen Turner deciding that this particular Thursday was the night she would make her move. Alfredo Crook had been the Alpha King of Ironvale for 12 years. He had taken the title at 24, younger than any Alpha before him in 2 generations, and he had held it with the particular discipline of someone who understood that control, not size, was the true currency of leadership. He was 36 now, and every year of ruling showed in him not as wear but as density, the way a good blade gets better with use rather than thinner. He was tall and broad, and moved like someone who had learned early that the way a man crosses a room tells other wolves everything they need to know about him before he opens his mouth. He kept his dark hair short. His jaw was strong and usually set. His eyes were the color of deep water, not the surface kind that catches light prettily, but the kind far below the surface where the pressure changes what things are. He was not cruel. He was not warm either. He was precise, which was its own category. The wolves of Ironvale respected him in the way that people respect weather, not because they were asked to, but because the alternative was simply not practical. He stood on the far side of the hall that night, surrounded by council members, delivering the kind of controlled attention to a policy discussion that made the council members feel important and himself feel somewhat less so. He had been attending these gatherings for 12 years, and every one of them required the same performance: engaged, authoritative, never bored, never distracted. He was not distracted, and then he was. It happened without permission and without warning. A scent, faint, threaded through the competing smells of 200 wolves in a closed hall. It was so light he should not have been able to isolate it at all. But his wolf found it the way water finds a crack in stone. Not searching, simply moving in the direction it was always going to move. He went still for 2 seconds. He identified the breach in his composure and sealed it. He continued his sentence exactly where he had left off, but the scent had landed. And his wolf, which was not something he had ever had difficulty managing, was now thoroughly and quietly alert in a way he did not have an explanation for. He did not look across the room to find the source. He was not going to do that. He did not look. He was, however, aware of his mother detaching herself from her position near the entrance and moving with quiet purpose toward the back of the hall. He filed that away. He would deal with it later. Kristen Turner had been positioning herself near Alfredo's circle for 2 years. She had done it intelligently, not aggressively, not in the way that announced itself as ambition, but with the slow patience of someone who understood that proximity to power was built in layers, not leaps. She was 28. She was beautiful. She was from a family with enough standing that her interest in the Alpha King's circle read as natural rather than calculated, which was exactly how she had engineered it. She had not expected Sabrina Robinson to become a problem. She had simply noticed, the way a predator notices a change in the wind's direction, that something had shifted in the hall tonight. And she had traced it, carefully, to the grey-dressed Omega, sitting alone in the corner. She did not know what had shifted. She did not need to know, or she knew only that she didn't like it, and that the simplest solution to something you do not like is to remove it before it can become something larger. She began making her way toward the back of the room. She reached Sabrina's corner at almost exactly the same moment Estella Anderson arrived from the other direction. What happened next was not a confrontation. It was quieter and more dangerous than that. Kristen stopped when she saw Estella sitting beside Sabrina. She read the room in a single glance. The deliberateness of Estella's posture, the placement of her hand, the particular quality of stillness that meant Estella Anderson was making a statement rather than having a conversation. She smiled at Estella. Estella looked back at her with the expression of a woman who had been playing this particular game since before Kristen was born. "Lady Estella, a lovely evening." "It is improving," Estella said pleasantly. She did not introduce Sabrina. She did not explain herself. She simply sat beside the Omega in the corner with the full weight of her authority, and let Kristen do the math. Kristen did the math. She smiled once more, inclined her head, and moved back toward the center of the hall. Sabrina, who had watched this entire exchange happen around her like weather around a stone, let out a breath so slowly she barely felt it leave. What just happened? What was that? Estella did not explain. She simply leaned close and delivered her 7 words, and then she stood and left, because her work in the corner was done. Sabrina sat with 7 words and a racing pulse, and the clear understanding that her ordinary Thursday had become something else entirely. Estella Anderson had not survived 38 years in Iron Veil Pack's leadership structure by being sentimental. She had been the mate of an Alpha King for 16 years before his death. She had raised one son to be a better ruler than his father, which was both her proudest accomplishment and the project that had cost her the most. She had watched wolves she trusted betray the pack, watched wolves she had written off prove her wrong, and developed, over decades, the particular kind of vision that comes from being the smartest person in most rooms for a very long time. She noticed things. That was her truest skill and her most useful weapon. Or she had noticed Sabrina Robinson 3 weeks before the gathering. During a routine maintenance inspection, she had joined out of her own curiosity about the East Territory reports. The Omega had been working alone in the second corridor, repairing a cracked wall, fitting with the quiet competence of someone who had done the job so many times they no longer needed to think about it. She had noticed the girl's posture, the way she moved through the space, the small flinch when a senior wolf passed too close without acknowledging her, the way she recovered from the flinch so quickly that it was almost invisible, the recovery of someone who had practiced not being seen to hurt. Estella had filed her away. Not urgently. Simply stored, the way someone tucks a note into a pocket because it feels like it might matter later. It had mattered sooner than she expected. She found Sabrina after the gathering released, as the hall emptied and the wolves of rank departed in the easy clusters of people who had somewhere better to be. She caught her arm gently at the side door and guided her down a quiet corridor into a small antechamber that had hosted more private conversations than its furniture had any idea about. She closed the door. She turned. Sabrina stood in the center of the room with her hands at her sides and her chin level and her eyes steady, and Estella found herself revising her assessment upward. The girl had composure. The real kind, not the performed kind. The composure of someone who has been in difficult rooms before and learned that panic helps nothing. "Sit down, Sabrina." Sabrina sat. "I am going to tell you several things. I would like you to hear them before you argue with any of them. Can you do that?" "Yes," Sabrina said. Estella sat across from her. She arranged her hands in her lap. She spoke directly. "Kristen Turner filed a preliminary petition with the Pack Council 2 weeks ago. It calls for the formal review of your right to remain in Iron Veil on grounds of social non-contribution. Under old Pack law that has not been invoked in 18 years but has never been removed from the books, a rejected Omega with no active bond, no family member of standing, and a contribution rating below a certain threshold can be brought before council for expulsion. Kristen has been building her case patiently. Tonight was her test of how quickly she could move if she needed to." Sabrina stared at her. The word expulsion sat in her chest like a stone. "Eli, Mama, if they expel me, who feeds them? Who repairs the roof? Who gets Eli to school on the mornings Mama cannot get out of bed?" She pressed those thoughts down. She would not be useful if she panicked. Why is she doing this? I am no threat to her. I have nothing she wants. "You have something you do not know you have," Estella said. She paused, choosing her words with the care of someone who knows the weight of what they are carrying. My son's wolf reacted to your presence tonight. I saw it. He did not show it to the room, but I know every degree of control my son exercises, and I know what it looks like when something breaks through. Kristen did not see it clearly, but she felt the shift. She does not know what it means, but she is not a woman who tolerates uncertainties in her plans. You became an uncertainty tonight, or that is why she is moving now, rather than in another month. Sabrina was very still. No, that is not possible. I am a rejected Omega. I have no bond, no standing, nothing that would make an Alpha King's wolf so much as notice me. This is a mistake. With respect, Lady Estella, I think you may have misread what you saw. I have not misread a wolf in 30 years, Estella said, without heat, simply as fact. A silence settled between them. Outside the door, the hall continued its quiet evacuation. What do you want from me? Sabrina asked finally. I want you to accept a placement under my son's household protection. I can establish the grounds for it within PAC procedure. There are protocols for this that cannot be challenged by Kristen's petition while they are active. You will stay at the estate. You will appear in public alongside the household when relevant. You will give Kristen's case no clean angle to attack while I work on the larger problem. Sabrina looked at her. Does he know about this? Not yet. He is not going to like it. No, Estella agreed. He is not. But my son does what is right, even when it inconveniences him. It is his best quality and his most exhausting one. Sabrina thought about Eli's face. She thought about the leaking roof corner and the thin mornings and the way her mother's hands trembled now when she held a cup. She thought about what expulsion from Ironvale would mean for all three of them. My family, she said. My mother and my brother. They depend on my income. I cannot simply disappear into an estate and leave them. They will be provided for, discreetly, or I will arrange it. Estella said it the way she said most things, as though the matter was already settled, and this was simply the announcement. Sabrina looked at her for a long moment. She was 23 years old, she had nothing, and a woman she had met 20 minutes ago was offering her survival on terms she had not finished understanding yet. This could be a trap. This could be something that makes everything worse. You do not know this woman. You do not know her motives. But you know what Kristen Turner's eyes looked like when she crossed the room toward you tonight. And you know what expulsion means. All right, she said. Estella nodded once. Then she stood and straightened her mantle and opened the door, as though it had always been that simple. Maybe for her it had been. What the conversation between Alfredo Crook and his mother happened at 10:30 that night in his study, which was the room in the estate where he processed everything that was too complex for the public spaces of his office. It was a working room, maps on the walls, territory reports stacked with the deliberate order of a man who trusted systems over inspiration, a fire that burned low and practical rather than decorative. He had been standing at his desk for 20 minutes when Estella knocked and entered without waiting, which was the only way she ever entered any room. He put down the report he was pretending to read. No, he said. You have not heard what I am proposing. You are proposing to place a rejected Omega under this household's formal protection and station her at this estate, and based on the premise that my wolf had a reaction I didn't report to you, and that Kristen Turner's legal petition is moving faster than we can counter through normal channels. Am I wrong? Estella was quiet for a moment. You are not wrong. Then no. He moved from behind his desk. He walked to the window. It was his equivalent of pacing. He never paced, but he moved toward windows when his composure was working harder than usual. What my wolf does or does not do is not a basis for disrupting this household's stability. I am the Alpha King. The PAC watches everything I do for signs of weakness, inconsistency, or irrationality. Bringing an unclaimed Omega into my home under an arrangement that the PAC will immediately misread is all three of those things. Kristen Turner is operating with external support, Estella said. Her voice was quiet and direct. "She has connections to the Varren faction. I have been tracking it for 6 weeks. They are not simply interested in embarrassing a rejected Omega. They want to create instability in your leadership at a specific moment. And Sabrina Robinson has become the vehicle they are using. Removing her from Kristen's reach is not a romantic gesture, Alfredo. It is a tactical one." He turned from the window. "The Varren faction." Yes. The name settled the air differently. The Varren faction was a long-standing coalition of Eastern wolves who had never fully accepted Ironvale's central authority, and who had been looking for a legitimate reason to push for council restructuring for the better part of a decade. Alfredo was quiet for longer this time. The fire shifted. He looked at the maps on his wall. She stays in the East guest quarters. She is under household protection, not personal consideration. She participates in appearances where strategic visibility is useful. That is the boundary of this arrangement, and it does not change regardless of what either of us notices or does not notice. "That is fine," Estella said. "And Mother, next time you consult me before you make commitments involving my household." "Of course," she said, with perfect serenity. She left. He stood alone in his study and looked at the window for a long time. His wolf was doing something quiet and persistent that he had no language for yet. He put more wood on the fire and went back to his reports. Sabrina arrived at the estate the following morning with one worn traveling bag containing everything she had decided to bring. Greta, the household coordinator, a capable, brisk woman who had the energy of someone who had seen many unusual arrangements and processed all of them with equal efficiency, showed her to the East guest quarters. The room was larger than her family's main living area. Clean, warm, properly furnished. A real bed with real linens, a writing desk, a fireplace that worked, curtains without fraying. She set her bag on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the floor for a moment. "Eli thinks you are helping with an administrative project at the main estate. Mama knows a little more than that. They are both being provided for. This is not permanent. This is tactical. You are doing this for them. You are fine. The room is clean. The situation is manageable. You are fine." She unpacked her bag. She organized the small things she had brought into the unfamiliar drawers. She made the space functional, because that was the first thing she always did in any environment that felt uncertain. Made it functional, and then worked outward from there. Or she had not met the Alpha King yet. Not properly. Not with words. She would manage that when it came. She met him the next morning, early in the estate's side garden, the smaller one near the east wing, which she had found the evening before when she had needed air and had not wanted to navigate the estate's main areas. It was a modest garden for a place this size. Stone paths, low hedges, a bench that someone had positioned to catch the morning light. She had gone there before dawn with a blanket and a book, and the particular relief of outdoor air after a night spent in an unfamiliar space. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, steady, unhurried, the returned stride of someone finishing a long morning run. He came around the path corner and stopped. She stood up immediately. But it was reflex. 3 years of trained self-erasure moving her body before her mind had a say. He looked at her standing stiffly beside the bench with her book under one arm and her blanket trailing, and something in his expression shifted in a way she could not name. "Sit down. You do not need to stand for me in my own garden." She sat, carefully. He remained where he was, a few feet of garden path between them. He was dressed for running, simpler than the dark formal wear of the gathering, but no less controlled in the way he held himself. He looked at her with those level, unreadable eyes, and she had the sudden and entirely inconvenient sense that he was the kind of person who saw what was actually in front of him, rather than what he expected to see. "My mother explained the arrangement." "Yes." "Then you know this is temporary. The situation has specific parameters. I am not going to pretend it is anything other than what it is." "Neither am I," she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. I do not have any illusions about why I am here. He studied her for a moment in the way she was coming to understand was simply how he processed the world, directly, accurately, without social ornament. Good, he said. Then we understand each other. He continued past her toward the estate's main entrance. She sat in the morning garden with her book and her blanket, and her heart doing something quiet and complicated, and told herself firmly that understanding each other was exactly the right foundation for a temporary tactical arrangement and nothing else thing. But news that Sabrina Robinson was staying at the Alpha King's estate reached the pack before Sabrina had finished unpacking her second day's breakfast. Iron Vale was not a small community. It ran across 3 connected territories with several hundred wolves at various ranks, but it had the social efficiency of a much smaller place. Information moved through it, the way water moves through soil, not always along the routes you expected, but always downhill, always finding its level. By midday, 2 versions of the story were circulating. The first was that Sabrina had been placed under protection for a security matter that the Alpha's household was not discussing publicly. The second was considerably more interesting and involved a number of assumptions that had nothing to do with security. But the pack chose to believe the second one almost immediately. Sabrina felt this the first time she walked through the estate's main corridor, and 2 senior wolves going the other direction slowed their pace and looked at her with an attention they had never previously offered a maintenance worker from the East Territory. It was a deeply uncomfortable kind of attention. Not hostile. Assessing. They are deciding what you are now. They are deciding whether you matter. Let them decide. You know what this is. Stay clear. Her first official appearance came on the 4th day. A council luncheon, small, mid-rank, the kind of gathering that was regular enough to seem unplanned. Estella had arranged it. Sabrina wore the darkest and plainest dress from the selection Estella had quietly provided. She had not asked for the selection. It had simply appeared in her wardrobe, and she had decided that arguing about it would cost more energy than simply accepting it. She sat at the far end of the table. She ate. She listened. She did not perform anything. Alfredo was at the other end of the table and did not look at her once during the meal. She did not look at him either. And yet she was aware of him the entire time in the way you are aware of a fire in a room. Not because you are watching it, but because it changes the temperature of the air. On the 6th day, Kristen Turner came to the estate. She arrived in the early afternoon under the guise of visiting Estella. Plausible enough, they had known each other for years. She wore deep burgundy, fitted and precise, her posture communicating ownership of every room she entered. She was let into the main sitting room. Sabrina was already there, near the fire, working through a book she had borrowed from the estate's small library. She looked up. Kristen looked at her. Neither of them spoke for 3 full seconds, which is a long time when neither person is blinking. Kristen sat across from her with the smooth ease of someone who had decided how this conversation would go before it started. You look comfortable. The chair is good, Sabrina said pleasantly. I imagine this is quite a change from the East Territory. Warmer, certainly. Yes. A pause. Kristen adjusted the bracelet on her left wrist, a tiny movement that was also somehow a demonstration of perfect nails and expensive taste. I want you to know, I bear you no personal feelings about any of this, Sabrina. You are in a difficult situation. Anyone would accept help where it was offered, and I understand that completely. Sabrina looked at her. The words were arranged to sound kind. The intent underneath them was something much simpler. I am telling you that I see through what you are doing, and I am doing it politely, so you cannot object. Before she could answer, the sitting room door opened and Alfredo walked through it. Kristen rose. Her whole posture shifted, the particular realignment of a woman who has been rehearsing her reactions to this specific person. Alfredo, I was hoping to see you. He looked at her. He looked at Sabrina. He read the geometry of the room in less time than it takes to say the word geometry. Kristen, my mother is in the East Wing, if you came to see her. I came to see both of you. Well, really, Then hello has been said. He crossed to the side table, where he had apparently left a document that morning, picked it up, and positioned himself with the unhurried certainty of a man who has decided where the walls of a conversation are. The East Wing, Kristen. It was not aggressive. It was simply the end of the conversation. Kristen's smile held for a beat longer than was comfortable, and then she inclined her head and walked out. When the door closed, Sabrina exhaled. "She has come before?" he asked. "Not here. Other places. Do not let her make you smaller." He said it simply, without decoration, and then left with his document. She sat by the fire for a long time after, turning those words over in her mind. Do not let her make you smaller. When is the last time someone said something like that to you? When is the last time someone noticed that you were being made smaller and said the opposite out loud? She did not have an answer. That, by itself, told her something she was not ready to examine fully. The corridor incident happened the next day. She was walking through the estate's main hallway when Alfredo came the other direction with Harlan, the head of territory disputes, who was a large wolf with the spatial awareness of someone who had spent so many years being the biggest person in every room that he had stopped noticing other bodies as obstacles. Harlan's shoulder caught hers as he gestured mid-sentence, hard enough to spin her sideways into the wall display table. She caught the edge. The small ceramic piece on top of it rocked. She steadied it with her free hand, graceless but controlled. Harlan did not stop talking. Alfredo had already passed. He stopped. He looked back. She met his eyes. She gave him the small, closed expression that meant she was fine and wanted no attention paid to it. The expression she had perfected over 3 years of absorbing small damages without reaction. Harlan stopped mid-sentence. "We'll finish tomorrow." Harlan, who was many things but not suicidal, nodded and departed. Alfredo walked back toward her. He stopped at a proper distance. His eyes went briefly to her arm, then back to her face. "Are you hurt?" "No, I caught myself." "He has never learned to read a corridor," Alfredo said, with the dry specificity of someone describing a known and persistent problem. She almost smiled. She was aware of it. She pressed it back. "I noticed," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, and she had the same feeling she had had in the garden, of being looked at rather than through, of being accurately seen by someone whose attention was not casual. Then he nodded and continued down the corridor. She stood beside the wall table and breathed, and thought about how the simplest things were starting to feel like more than they were, and reminded herself carefully that temporary was a word with a specific meaning, and she needed to keep it close. On the 8th day, Sabrina found the library. It was tucked in the west wing, behind a door that looked like it was used for storage and turned out to be something much better. Not a grand library. 2 walls of shelves, a worn reading chair, natural light from a high window. Real books, the kind with soft covers and broken spines that meant they had been read rather than collected. She borrowed 2. She did not tell anyone. It seemed unnecessary to announce. On the 10th morning, she came down to breakfast with one of the books under her arm, settled into a chair at the smaller breakfast table, and found that Alfredo was already there with a territorial report flat beside his coffee. They read in silence for 15 minutes, but it was, she realized somewhere around the 12-minute mark, the most comfortable 15 minutes she had spent in this building, possibly in longer than that. Stop noticing that. That is not information you need. She turned a page. He turned a page. The morning light moved through the windows. Outside, the Pax Eastern Territory went on with its ordinary work. When he stood to leave, he glanced at the book in her hands. "That one has a slow second half. The first 100 pages are better than the rest." She looked up. "I will manage," she said. Something in his expression shifted. A small, private thing. The shade of almost amusement from a man who didn't amuse easily. Then he picked up his report and left. She held the book and reminded herself, again, firmly, of the word temporary and its specific meaning. but Estella met with her every other day in the East sitting room. These meetings were part briefing, part assessment. Estella would tell her what Kristen was doing. The petition was stalled but not dead. She was gathering new signatures. She was pushing a separate angle through a sympathetic council member. Then she would ask Sabrina questions that were not always obviously related to the political situation. How she was managing the estate's routines, what the household staff had said to her, how she read various wolves they had both observed. Sabrina answered honestly, because dishonesty with Estella Anderson felt both futile and disrespectful. On the 12th day, Estella asked, "What do you think of my son?" Sabrina was quiet for a moment. The question was a test, but she was not sure which kind. He is precise. He does not waste words. He notices more than he acknowledges out loud. A pause. He is heavier than he looks. I mean that in the weight of things way, not the physical way. Estella looked at her for a moment. That is the most accurate description of him I have heard from someone who has known him less than 2 weeks, she said. Sabrina looked out the window. Do not be pleased by that. Being accurate about a person is not the same as having a right to them. He carries leadership like it is physically in the body, Sabrina said, more quietly. Not like a performance, like something he was built around. He was, Estella said simply. The meeting ended without further comment on the subject, but Sabrina noticed that Estella's expression, as she left, was the expression of someone who had confirmed something she had been waiting to confirm. The late evenings were the most honest part of the day. After the meals and the brief public appearances and the careful social navigation, the estate quieted. The staff went to their quarters. The lights in the main corridor dimmed to something low and amber. Yet Sabrina would sit in her room or in the small West Library and let herself stop performing anything at all. She wrote letters to Eli, which she sent through Estella's arrangement. His replies came back within a day, full of information she had not asked for, about cartographic theory and pack boundary mathematics, and the quality of the new bread their neighbor had started making. She read them twice each time. They were the most important things in her day. She also thought, during those quiet evenings, about the thing she had been trying not to think about. Alfredo Crook was not what she had expected. She had expected cold and difficult. She had gotten precise and complicated. Or she had expected distance. She had gotten someone who occupied the same rooms with a consistent attention she was finding harder and harder to treat as incidental. She had expected a man who barely noticed she existed, and gotten someone who stopped a council meeting because a corridor had been unkind to her arm. These things were not reasons for anything. She knew that. She repeated it to herself with appropriate regularity. But the repetition was getting a little less convincing every morning. The attack came on a Tuesday night, which was the kind of ordinary detail that made it more frightening, not less. Sabrina had been in the East Garden, her garden now, by quiet habit. Past midnight, long after the estate had settled into its nighttime routines, or she had her blanket and her current book, and the kind of sleeplessness that is really just the body refusing to shut off because the mind has too much running through it. The garden was dark beyond the reach of the estate's rear lanterns. The trees at the property line were thick enough that the pack's eastern road was hidden from view. She heard the gate before she saw anything, a sound that was not quite right, the specific metallic complaint of iron being moved too carefully by someone who knew they should not be moving it. Her body understood first. She was on her feet before she had decided to stand. 2 wolves, young by the way they moved, the particular jittery energy of people sent to do something they are only half sure they want to do. The first came through the gap in the garden hedge 10 feet from her. The second hung back near the gate, watching the road. The first one knew her name. That was the detail that told her everything she needed to know. This was not random. She stepped back. The hedge was behind her. There was no direction that was fully clear. Do not run. Running tells a predator what you are. Think. What do you have? What is in reach? She did not have to decide. Alfredo came from the estate's rear door at a pace that covered 30 feet in a way that her mind didn't fully track. He moved between her and the first wolf before the wolf had taken a second step, and the sound the first wolf made when Alfredo's hand connected with his shoulder was the sound of something that had made a serious miscalculation. The second wolf at the gate ran. He was apparently smarter than his partner. The first wolf was on the garden path in a way that suggested he would be staying there for a while. Alfredo looked up. His eyes found her across the garden with an immediacy that had nothing casual in it. "Are you hurt?" "No." Her voice was steady. Her hands were not, but she kept them still. He crossed to her in 6 strides. He stood close, closer than their normal careful distance, closer than anything they had negotiated in the last 2 weeks. His wolf's energy was close to the surface in a way she could feel like heat from a fire, contained but absolutely present. He looked at her face, at her arms, at her hands, which she was holding very deliberately at her sides. "Come inside," he said. She followed him. Estella was in the main corridor when they came in, which confirmed that she had known something was likely tonight and had simply been waiting for the specific shape of it. Alfredo spoke to her in 3 precise sentences. Estella listened. She looked at the wolf the estate guards had now secured, then at Alfredo, then at Sabrina. He was directed. This was not improvised. "I know." "Sabrina," Estella said, and her voice was careful in a way Sabrina had not heard before. "I need to tell you something I should have told you before now. I did not, because I was not fully certain. I am certain now." Sabrina looked at her. "Your father was a record keeper. I knew that. What I have recently confirmed is that he was not only a record keeper. He was the person responsible for archiving the territorial boundary documents from 30 years ago, or documents that would now prove that certain boundary lines were drawn incorrectly, not by accident, by arrangement, between 3 individuals who benefited from the redrawing and who have been maintaining that false boundary ever since. 2 of those individuals are still active in this pack's leadership structure." Sabrina's breath had stopped somewhere in the middle of that. Thomas Robinson, her quiet father who had loved bad jokes and made terrible tea and read to her on Sunday mornings. Her father who had died 4 years ago of an illness that had come on quickly and had no particular explanation. "Papa, what did you know? What were you holding on to?" "He died protecting that record," she said. It was not a question. Estella was quiet for a moment. "I believe so, yes." The room held still. Alfredo was watching her, not with the distance he usually maintained, but with something direct and present that felt, in this moment, like an anchor. "You are safe here," he said. Not as comfort, as statement, as the thing he had already decided. She nodded. She believed him. That, she realized, was the most significant thing she had felt in 3 years. She cried that night, in her room, with the door closed and the fire burning low. She did it quietly, and she did it completely, and when it was over, she washed her face with cold water and sat at the writing desk and wrote a letter to Eli about cartography that said nothing about any of it. Then she lay down and looked at the ceiling. Papa was not just a quiet man. He was a man who held something real, and it cost him everything. And somehow, you inherited the weight of it without knowing. And now a woman you did not know 3 weeks ago, and the man everyone in this pack is afraid to look directly at, are the only things standing between you and what that weight is trying to do to you. She pressed her hands flat on her chest. "Hold on. Just hold on." Something changed in Sabrina Robinson the morning after the garden attack. She did not have words for it immediately. It was not a decision she made consciously, the way she had consciously decided to come to the estate, or to accept Estella's offer, or to stay in the corner at the gathering. It was something quieter than a decision, the internal equivalent of standing up straight after being bent over for a long time, the spine remembering what it was built for. She had survived 3 years of being invisible by choice. And she had kept herself small and quiet and uninteresting because that was the armor available to her. She had worn it long enough that the shape of it had started to feel like her actual shape. She had been wrong about that, shape underneath was something else. Kristen's next move came 10 days after the attack. She had been busy. She had circulated a document. Not a formal petition this time, but something more insidious. A carefully written expression of concern, signed by 11 mid-rank wolves, questioning whether the household protection arrangement was creating the kind of social ambiguity that reflected poorly on the Alpha King's leadership clarity. The language was elegant. It never said anything directly. It implied everything. Petra, the pack's logistics coordinator, a solid, direct woman who had been one of the first mid-rank wolves to treat Sabrina like a person with working professional knowledge, came to find her with the document and a look of flat displeasure. She is doing this without names, because she knows she cannot win with names. She wants the whisper, not the charge. I know what she wants, Sabrina said. Are you going to say something about it? Sabrina looked at the document. She looked at Petra. She thought about her father's name in an archive, holding something true and the cost that truth had carried. Yes, she said. I am. She requested a place at the next open gathering. She did it through Estella, who raised one silver eyebrow and then arranged it without comment. She stood at the front of a room of mid-rank and senior wolves on a Wednesday afternoon and said what she had to say. No theatrics, no performance, just a clear voice and a straight back, and words that were true. She had worked the East Territory maintenance rotation for 2 years. Her record was unbroken, and her work had been consistently rated at the top of the maintenance crew's efficiency reports. She had never asked for resources beyond what the work required. She had never failed a scheduled rotation. The arrangement currently in place regarding her safety was a private matter connected to a formal investigation, and it had not affected her work record or her obligations to the pack. And then, looking at no one person specifically, and everyone generally. If any wolf in this pack has a formal complaint about my record or my conduct, I invite them to bring it to the council with evidence. I will answer every charge. But I will not be the subject of whisper campaigns run by people who do not have the courage to make a direct accusation. If you have something to say about me, say it clearly. I will be here. The room absorbed this, Petra said from the third row. Well said. 2 other wolves near her nodded, then 3 more. The murmur that followed was not unanimous, but it was not hostile either. It was the sound of a room recalibrating. Kristen's document lost 9 signatures by the following morning. Not all of them, but 9. Alfredo found her afterward in the library. He had been at the gathering. He had not spoken during it, had simply stood near the back with his hands behind him and his face doing its usual controlled nothing. But he had been there the whole time. She was returning the book she had finished. He was standing in the aisle with the particular stillness of someone between one thing and the next. She nearly walked into him. She stopped. He did not move back. That was well done. She was still running on the quiet adrenaline of having said a true and difficult thing in front of people who were not obligated to believe her. I meant every word of it. I know, he said. That is what made it work. He looked at her in the way she had learned to recognize, directly, without ornament. The look of someone for whom accuracy was its own form of respect. You are not who I thought you were. She looked back at him. I'm not sure I was who I thought I was either, she said, more quietly than she meant to. Something moved in his expression, something she had not seen there before. Not quite softness, but the thing that exists just before softness. He pulled a book from the shelf beside him and held it out. This one is better than the last 2 you have borrowed. She took it. The space between their hands was close but precise. How do you know which ones I have borrowed? The arrangement of the gap they leave on the shelf. She stared at him. He has been noticing which books you take. He notices the gaps. She said nothing. She could not think of a single thing to say to that. He left the aisle, while she stood alone in the library with the book, and a warmth spreading through her chest that she had been telling herself for 3 weeks she was not going to feel. She had apparently been wrong about that too. The rain started late on a Thursday and had no intention of stopping. It had been a hard day. A council meeting that had gone 2 hours longer than scheduled, a territorial report from the northern border that contained information nobody wanted, and Alfredo spending most of the afternoon in the kind of focused, closed-off work that the estate's household had learned meant he needed distance and silence. He had come out of the council room at 7 in the evening with the particular set of his jaw that meant he had been managing difficult things for too many hours and was still managing. No, Sabrina had been in the west corridor when he emerged. She had not been waiting for him. She had simply been on her way from the library to the kitchen because she had missed dinner and was planning to quietly make something practical. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped too. He looked at her the way he sometimes did in the evenings when the house was quiet and the performance of the day was technically over, with less of the filter engaged, more of the actual person visible behind the precision. Come to the fire room. The corridor is cold. It was not a question, but it was also, somehow, not quite an order. It was the voice of someone who wanted company and was unused to asking for it directly. She followed him. The fire room was warm and small and smelled of old wood and warmth. They sat on opposite sides of the fireplace. But outside the window, the rain continued its persuasive argument against the night. Neither of them spoke for a while. The fire did the work of the room, filling the silence with something that made it comfortable rather than empty. Sabrina had her hands wrapped around the mug she had brought from the kitchen. He had his forearms resting on his knees, his posture open in a way it rarely was when anyone else was around. The formal architecture of how he held himself had, in the warmth and rain and quiet, relaxed slightly. He spoke first. I have been running this pack for 12 years. Every decision I have made in that time has started from the same place. That what I feel and what I owe are two separate categories. That keeping them separate is part of what makes leadership work. She waited because she could tell he was not finished. But I am beginning to think I built that rule to make something easier that was always going to be hard regardless. The fire shifted. The rain pressed against the glass. She looked at his face, the jaw, the careful eyes, the weight that lived in him like structural stone. She thought about all the versions of distance she had watched him maintain over 4 weeks, and how each time something had pulled him a step closer, without him apparently deciding to move. Alfredo. He looked at her. You do not look at me the way anyone has looked at me in 3 years, she said quietly. Not as flattery, as a fact she was still getting used to. You look at me like I am someone, not a problem to be managed, not something to be dismissed. That matters to me more than I expected it to, and I need you to know that I know the difference between mattering because of a situation and mattering because someone has decided you are worth their real attention. He was looking at her steadily. I know the difference too, he said. His voice was quieter than his normal register. I stopped seeing you as a duty somewhere around the 2nd week. I have been trying to decide what to do with that since. The fire cracked. She looked at him and he looked at her, and the gap between them across the fire room felt much smaller than the physical distance. She pulled back, gently. Not because she did not feel it. She felt all of it. The warmth and the pull and the very specific terror of wanting something that could be taken away. I need to be sure this is real, she said. Not the situation. Not your wolf. Not 4 weeks of forced proximity, creating something that dissolves the moment the pressure lifts. I need to know it would exist outside of all of this. He did not argue with that. He looked at her for a long moment, with an expression she had not seen before on his face. Open, considered, something that was not certainty yet, but was the honest thing that lives before certainty. That is a fair thing to need, he said. She nodded, but they stayed by the fire until the rain slowed to something quieter. They did not fill the silence with anything that was not needed, and that, somehow, was its own kind of answer to the question she hadn't quite asked yet. She went back to her room that night and lay on the clean bed in the warm room and let herself, very carefully, and without examining it too closely, feel something that was not survival. It was the closest thing to hope she had held in a very long time. Kristen moved on the 32nd day. She had chosen her moment with care. The mid-season Pack Summit was the largest formal gathering short of an emergency council. All members, all ranks, the Alpha King, in full public capacity. It was the kind of event where what happened was witnessed by everyone and remembered by everyone, and anything that was said in it could not be quietly managed afterward. She had spent 32 days making sure this moment was the most damaging one possible. Sabrina sat in the summit hall with Estella to her left and Petra directly behind her. The room was full, warm with bodies and the collective weight of wolves in formal pack assembly. Alfredo was at the head table with the council, and she could feel his presence from across the hall in the particular way she had stopped pretending she did not feel. Kristen rose from her seat mid-session. She had been granted speaking time through a council member she had cultivated carefully. She stood with her hands folded and her posture perfect, and her voice measured, and she delivered her case the way a surgeon delivers a procedure, efficiently, precisely, without visible emotion. The household protection arrangement had been represented to the pack as a security matter. The evidence, she said, told a different story. The arrangement had no filed security documentation. It had no formal threat assessment attached to it. What it did have was a rejected Omega, living in the Alpha King's household for over a month, attending meals with him, appearing at pack events beside him, and occupying a position in his daily life that the pack hadn't been honestly told about. She called it a deception. She called it a transparency violation. She called it exactly the kind of leadership inconsistency that gave rival factions legitimate grounds to question the Alpha King's judgment. Under pack law, if the arrangement was not a genuine security placement, it was a personal relationship. And personal relationships involving the Alpha King required formal declaration or formal dissolution. If neither existed, the council was required to ask the Alpha King to choose publicly, end the arrangement, or declare it formally before the assembled pack. The room went very still. It was not that the logic was airtight. Estella could see the cracks in it, and so could two of the senior council members. But the cracks were in the details, and what Kristen had built was not primarily a legal argument. It was a social one, and social arguments in a full pack assembly operated on different mechanics. Sabrina sat with her hands folded in her lap and felt the specific quality of a trap closing. This is it. This is the moment she has been building toward. And if Alfredo tries to defend the security framing without documentation, it looks worse. And if he declares anything formal in front of this room under pressure, it looks political. And if he ends the arrangement to protect his standing, then you are expelled from Iron Vale within the week. There is only one move that does not cost him something he cannot afford to lose. She stood up before she had finished deciding to. Every head in the room turned. She looked at Elder Mara, the most senior council voice in the room. The arrangement was made for my safety. That is true. It is also true that the formal documentation has not been filed, because the investigation attached to it is ongoing, and filing prematurely would expose the individuals under investigation before the case is ready. Lady Estella and the Alpha King are both aware of the investigation status. A pause. She kept her voice clear and even. I am not going to let this council believe something manipulative happened here. It did not. I came to this estate because a threat was identified, and I stayed because the threat is not resolved. Whether there is anything else between myself and the Alpha King is not the subject of this challenge, and it is not Kristen Turner's to expose or claim authority over. She looked directly at Kristen. If you have evidence of a specific violation, bring it. I will stand here and answer it. But I will not stand here and let my presence be used as a political tool by someone who is worried about her own plans, not the pack's well-being. She sat down. The room sat with that for a moment. Then she looked at Elder Mara again. I will leave the estate if it protects the Alpha King from political damage. That offer stands. I will not be the thing that costs him what he has built. Estella's hand found hers under the table and pressed once, briefly. Sabrina kept her face still. This is the right thing. This is the only right thing. Whatever you feel does not get to be bigger than what he has given this pack and what they need from him. You know how to make the choice that costs you. You have always known. She sat very still and waited for what came next. Alfredo stood up. Not dramatically. Not with the energy of someone who had been waiting for this. He stood the way he did everything, with the calm, unhurried authority of a man who had decided something and was simply acting on the decision. He looked at Elder Mara. The investigation attached to Sabrina Robinson's protection placement concerns a boundary fraud that has been active for 30 years. The documentation involves current PAC officials. I have chosen not to file it prematurely because premature filing would allow the individuals involved to destroy or hide evidence before the case is complete. That documentation will be submitted to the full council within 48 hours. At that time, the grounds for the protection arrangement will be fully established and on the record. He paused. Let the room receive that. Kristen Turner, who brought this challenge, has connections to the Varren faction. Those connections are part of the same investigation. The individuals who sent wolves to the estate 3 weeks ago, the individuals who wanted Sabrina Robinson removed before that case could be built, are represented in this room today. The air changed. Or 2 council members on the left side of the head table went very still in a way that was its own kind of answer. Alfredo came around the head table. He walked across the room. The pack watched him and did not breathe. He stopped in front of Sabrina. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. The hall held. Sabrina offered to leave to protect my standing. I want this pack to understand what that means. A woman who has survived 3 years of rejection, who has kept her family alive on what the pack left her with, who stood in this hall today and told a true and difficult thing when a lie would have been much easier. That woman offered to walk away to protect a man who has the full weight of an alpha title on his side. His voice was even, controlled, and underneath the control, something that was not controlled at all. I am not choosing her because my wolf noticed her. I am not choosing her because my mother saw something in a hall 4 weeks ago. I am choosing her because she is the bravest person in this room, and I would be a worse Alpha King and a smaller man for watching her walk out that door. He held out his hand. Sabrina looked at his hand. She looked at his face, the jaw, the careful eyes, the weight that was still there and always would be, because that was who he was. She thought about all the temporary things she had told herself over 32 days. She thought about the fire room and the rain. She thought about her father holding something true until it cost him everything. You have been waiting for someone to see you and choose you anyway, not because they needed something from you, not because you were useful, because you were worth it. He is not asking you to be small. He is not asking you to disappear. He is standing in front of everyone and asking you to be here. She took his hand. The hall was so quiet she could hear the fire in the wall sconces. Then Petra, from the 4th row, started clapping. Slowly, then not. Then 3 other wolves. Then more. Not unanimous. There were wolves in that room who would take more time, who would need to see how this resolved before they offered their endorsement. That was fair. Real things take time to earn. But the room, on balance, didn't fall away. It stayed. It shifted. It began to reconfigure itself around a new truth. Elder Mara cleared her throat. The challenge brought by Kristen Turner is dismissed pending review of the investigation documentation. The Alpha King's formal declaration is received and will be entered into PAC record. This session is closed. Kristen sat in her seat and didn't move for a long time. She had built this challenge on one assumption, that Alfredo would not risk his political standing for a rejected Omega. She had been wrong, not slightly wrong, entirely wrong, in the way that reveals a fundamental misreading of character. The investigation documentation was submitted 46 hours later. 2 council members resigned before the formal proceedings. A third was removed. The boundary fraud was corrected. 3 families in the East Territory received formal restitution for resources they had been quietly losing for a decade. Her father's name was entered into the revised pack record as the keeper of the original boundary documents. The honest ones. It was a small entry. 3 lines. It was, Sabrina thought when she read it, the most her father had ever asked for, and the very least he deserved. Kristen Turner resigned from her advisory position the following week and left Iron Vale for a Western Territory. She was not pursued. There were enough consequences built into the investigation's findings that additional ones would have been excessive. She carried the weight of what she had done quietly, which was perhaps the most fitting punishment for a woman who had operated entirely on appearances. Estella found Sabrina in the East Garden the evening after the summit. She sat beside her on the low stone bench where Sabrina had once sat, with her hands clasped too tightly and her shoulders braced for what was coming. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "Your father would have appreciated tonight," Estella said. Sabrina looked at the dark garden. "Did you know him?" "Not well, but he was a man who kept things accurate when it would have been much easier not to. That is rarer than it should be." Sabrina was quiet for a moment. "I want to bring Eli here, for a visit. He has questions I am not ready to answer, and he will ask them in a place with better food, which will soften the experience for both of us." Estella made a sound that was, remarkably, a laugh. A small one. Controlled, but genuine. "Bring him Saturday. I will tell the kitchen." They sat in the cool dark together for a while longer. Around them, Iron Vale Pack continued its quiet evening business, reshaping itself in small ways around what had happened today. Alfredo found her later. He came into the garden after Estella had gone in, and he sat beside her in the space that had slowly, without either of them making a formal decision about it, or stopped being a polite distance and started being simply the space between 2 people who are close. The night was clear. The garden was quiet. Somewhere in the Eastern Territory, a nightbird was doing its particular work. "You are going to continue having opinions about things," he said. It was not quite a question. "Consistently," she said. "I assumed. You are going to have to manage the part of the pack that needs more time. I am accustomed to managing the pack." She looked at him sideways. He looked at her the same way. And then she leaned into his shoulder, and he did not flinch or adjust, but simply stayed where he was, warm and solid and present in the way that only real things are. She thought about Eli coming Saturday. She thought about her mother's hands, which had stopped shaking as much since the regular visits from the healer. She thought about a low stone bench and a rejected Omega with her hands clasped too tightly, and a silver-haired woman who had seen something worth saving and moved before anyone else thought to. She thought, "This is what it feels like when you stop surviving and start living. There is no single moment when it switches. It is just that one day you look around, and the walls have moved outward, and the air is different, and something that felt impossible has quietly become ordinary." The night settled around them. She stayed where she was. Sabrina Robinson did not become the Alpha King's formal partner in a single sweeping ceremony. Real things are built more gradually than that, and she was, by now, a woman who trusted gradual. What happened was this. Eli arrived on Saturday at 11 in the morning, looked at the estate's kitchen for 30 seconds, and announced that he was revising his career plans to include something food-related. Sabrina held him for a long time, and he let her, which she usually resisted, which told her everything she needed to know about how much he had missed her. He met Alfredo and decided, after a brief and very direct examination, that he was acceptable. Alfredo handled the examination with remarkable patience, and only one raised eyebrow. Cora Robinson visited 2 weeks later. She stood in the East Garden on a clear morning and looked around at the clean paths and the tended hedges and the careful orderliness of a well-kept place. and she started crying in the quiet, in a surprised way of someone who had stopped expecting good things and had then been caught off guard by one. Sabrina held her mother's hand and did not say anything, because some things do not require words. Petra became something that operated like a friend, which was different from any formal designation and more useful than most of them. She was direct and funny, and deeply impatient with incompetence, all of which Sabrina found deeply refreshing. The investigation resolved in 4 months. 2 officials faced formal pack consequences. The boundary was corrected. 3 East Territory families received restitution. Her father's record was entered in the pack history. And Alfredo, precise, controlled, heavy with the weight of 12 years of running something that mattered, learned, slowly and without it feeling like weakness, how to be in the same space as someone he had chosen and let himself be chosen back. He was not easy to love. He would have told you so himself, in that flat, accurate way he had of describing reality. He was demanding of himself in ways that occasionally became demanding of the people near him. He needed quiet when he was processing difficult things, which was frequent. He did not offer comfort easily, but when he did, it was specific and real and worth more than the performed version. He learned her too. Learned the difference between her silence, that meant she was content, and the silence that meant she was managing something alone that she shouldn't have to manage alone. Learned that she would argue about things that mattered and let small things go, which was a sign of good judgment he came to rely on. He learned that she was the bravest person he knew, not in spite of fear, but inside it. That she felt everything fully and did the hard thing anyway. 6 months after the summit, on a Tuesday that had no particular ceremony planned, he asked her if she wanted to stay. Not at the estate, not under any arrangement. With him. Officially, publicly, permanently. She said yes without pausing, which surprised her, because she had expected to need time to think about it. But she already knew the answer. She had known it for a while. The pack acknowledged her formally at the next assembly. She stood at the front of the great hall, the same hall where she had once sat at the very back, in the corner, hands clasped, waiting to leave. And she stood straight, and she looked at the room, and the room looked back. Nobody looked through her. Or not one wolf. The rejected Omega had become the woman the Alpha King had chosen openly, in front of everyone, at personal cost, for no strategic reason, only for the true one. The cruel had faced their consequences. The vulnerable were no longer left undefended. The pack was not fixed. Packs never are, because they are made of people, and people are complicated. But it was different. It was moving in the direction of better. And somewhere in the Eastern Territory, in a house with a properly repaired roof, a 12-year-old boy who wanted to be a cartographer was drawing a map of Ironvale that included, in very careful lettering along the boundary lines he had corrected, the name of his grandfather who had kept the truth. Thomas Robinson, record keeper, honest man. It was the best map Eli had ever drawn. Before we close this one out, let me ask you something. If you were Sabrina, would you have stayed with him, or run before the whole pack could break you? Tell me in the comments. I already know your answers are going to be something special. And if this story gave you suspense, warmth, and that quiet kind of hope that creeps up on you, subscribe, hit the like button, and share this with someone who loves powerful romance with real stakes. Now that support keeps this channel alive and keeps these stories coming. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. What this story teaches us lessons worth carrying with you. Surviving and living are not the same thing. Sabrina kept herself and her family alive through discipline, sacrifice, and learning exactly how much space she was allowed to take up. That was brave. But surviving in a small space for long enough can make you mistake the small space for your natural size. It is not. The size you occupy when you are no longer afraid is your actual size. Being rejected by the wrong person is not a verdict on your worth. A rejection from someone who was never right for you does not define what you deserve from someone who is. Marcus's words told you everything about the limits of his vision and nothing about the truth of who Sabrina was. Do not allow someone else's blindness to become your self-description. The people who try hardest to diminish you are often afraid of what you represent. Kristen Turner did not hate Sabrina personally. She feared what Sabrina's existence disrupted. When someone goes out of their way to make you feel small, ask yourself what they are trying to protect. The answer is usually about them, not you. Honesty in a hard moment is always worth it, even when it costs you. Sabrina stood in front of the whole pack and told the truth when a more careful silence might have been safer. That honesty was what ultimately dismantled Kristen's case. Not cleverness, not political maneuvering, but a woman saying clearly what was true and standing behind it. Real love is chosen, not just felt. Alfredo's wolf noticed Sabrina before his mind was ready to. But what made his declaration in the summit hall matter was not the instinct, it was the decision. He chose her deliberately, at cost, with full awareness of what he was doing. Feeling something is the beginning. Choosing it, out loud, in public, when it is not the convenient thing, is what makes it real. Protecting others is not the same as disappearing for them. Sabrina loved her family so completely that she had built the habit of sacrificing herself as the first available option. Her offer to leave the estate to protect Alfredo was beautiful, and it came from love, but so did his refusal to let her go. Real love does not only ask you to give yourself away, or sometimes it insists on your presence. Help can come from directions you never expected. Estella Anderson was not soft. She was calculating and strategic and not particularly warm. She was also the person who saw Sabrina when no one else bothered to look. Be careful not to disqualify your advocates because they do not look the way you imagined. Sometimes the hand extended toward you comes from exactly the direction you were not watching. The truth is more durable than a well-managed lie. Kristen built her scheme carefully. She had documents, signatures, legal language, timing. None of it survived the weight of the actual record. Truth is often slower than deception and requires more patience, but it does not rot from the inside the way deception does. A person who keeps records of honest things is doing something that matters, but even if no one acknowledges it at the time. Thomas Robinson was a quiet man who kept accurate documents. He paid an enormous price for that accuracy. He did not live to see the correction he made possible. But the correction happened. His name is in the record. The families he protected by holding that truth received what they were owed. What we do with integrity, even in private, even without audience, has consequences that outlast us. The pack changes when one person refuses to accept a smaller story than the true one. Sabrina's story was not just her own. When she stood up in that gathering hall and spoke, when she refused to be managed into exile, when she took Alfredo's hand in front of every wolf who had once looked through her, she was not only changing her life, she was changing the conditions under which every other wolf in that pack operated. One person living with more honesty, more courage, and more refusal to shrink can shift the culture of every room they inhabit. Be that person where you are. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Every story we tell is for you.